Welcome everyone to our next Scout Roundtable instalment of the Own the Challenge, Be the Change series. We have representatives from Scottish SMEs that the Scout project has worked with, including Crover, IntelliDigest, NiTech, Bio and Thermachem, to discuss the great work that they are all doing in the areas of environmental sustainability and carbon reduction. Today we're going to focus on NiTech, and we have Paul Hodges here to discuss the great work that they are doing. So please, Paul.
Thank you very much. Yes, we're seeing an enormous growth in interest over the last 6 months now for our continuous crystallizers and reactors. So we're really selling into the chemicals industry, the pharmaceuticals industry, CBD, areas like that. And the issue for companies is that manufacturing is often a kind of Cinderella activity. If it's working, it doesn't really matter if it works perfectly. The people on the site know how to make it work, and they muddle through, as it were. But when you get to net zero, suddenly your CO2 emissions become important. And a lot of technology, if you sort of think about what we call a stirred tank reactor, which is essentially the same as a saucepan. If you were making stew or chili con carne, you stir it round, and if you're like me, you get distracted for a moment, you come back and you find a bit is burnt, so on and so forth. And that's exactly what happens in chemicals manufacturing. And there's a lot of waste, and there's a lot of CO2 emissions, and it's not very sustainable. As I say, up till now, managements have tended to say, yeah, but, it's all right, isn't it? And so on. And now, of course, they're under pressure to do something. So that's where we're seeing the interest, because we can, the great thing is, once you've decided to install our equipment, and we're getting some very big contracts now coming through, it's not only safer and faster and greener, but it's also cheaper, a lot cheaper, up to 50% cheaper on operating costs, for example, 70% cheaper on capital costs. So this is one of those beautiful net zero stories where you can say, look, it's not only the right thing to do for the planet, but it's also better for your bottom line.
Great, thanks, Paul. And it's really interesting to hear how waste reduction is such an important thing for companies as well, for their bottom lines, and how to reduce the footprint and things like that. I'd like to invite everybody else to have a comment on what Paul's discussed.
It's quite interesting to hear your presentation, Paul. When you talk about continuous crystallization, how is this really impacting on managing chemical waste in the industry, and how do we see the future for it going on?
Well, thank you. I used to work at ICI, if you remember ICI, and we had a lot of big reactors. These are sort of 36-ton reactors, the size of a sort of 2-story apartment building. And what happens is, just like my example of stew and chili con carne, you throw all the bits in, and you heat them up, and 10, 24 hours later or whatever, enormous amount of energy has been used, and hopefully it's all okay. You then send in a couple of people to dig out all the stuff that's stuck to the sides. My example of having got it burnt, that's inevitably going to happen. So there's an awful lot of waste here, and not only in that sense, but because you don't really know what's happening in the reactor, it's steel, and so you can't look into it. What you end up with is about 1 in 10 batches go wrong, and you have to reprocess them, or in worst case, you have to throw them away. When you go to continuous, you know exactly what you're doing all the time, and so you can monitor. If you want to crystallize down, people remember doing crystallization in the school lab, for example. So if you want to crystallize salt out of a solution, you can say, look, I want to take it down from 70 degrees to 10 degrees in 10 seconds. If you want to do it for longer, if you want to do it a shorter time, so on. So you're getting very precise measurements, and that's, in other words, really what you're doing is you're bringing measurement for the first time into these smaller volume products where there's an enormous amount of waste at the moment.
I'm just wondering, Paul, do you find that are your customers actually coming to you looking for more sustainable solutions, or is it being driven internally, or is it a combination of the two?
Well, we started off, our marketing strategy was to work with some of the largest companies in the world in their particular field, on the grounds that we had limited resources, so we could get some of the big boys and girls to work with us, then they would be able to use that technology around their sites. They have more than one site, so instead of making one call and then another call to somebody else and so on, you make one call and then it spreads out in the network effect. But also because they're leaders in the field, then other people look at them and say, oh, well, if they're doing it, maybe we should look at it as well. And what we've seen in the last, I'd say 6 or 9 months, is that companies have really begun to prioritize scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in a way that they hadn't done before. And the obvious place, if you're going to prioritize scope 1 and scope 2, is manufacturing, because that's where most of your energy is used. That's where most of your CO2 emissions happen.
Thanks, Paul. No, that's great insight and really interesting tech. You know, anything we can do to reduce waste can only be a good thing. And if it costs people less, then even better. So I just want to thank everybody for your time today. It's been great to hear about your sustainable technologies, and I'll just close off by saying that we are here to help companies get their innovative ideas to market faster. And that includes support with sustainable technologies and improving sustainability. So please don't hesitate to get in touch with a member of the Scout team to find out more. So thank you.